Hello, everybody. My name is Kitty, and I'll be your host for today's Etchr Live feedback session. We are here with the fabulous Anna Korteweg, who's going to be giving us some feedback on the paintings that people submitted from the class that they did with her. So also, please stay till the end because we are going to be doing a giveaway for a $100 gift certificate to the people who sent in work and who are here live with us. So you do need to be present in order to win. And without any further ado, I'm just going to hand this over to Anna, who's going to say hello and tell us more about what we're doing today.
Hi, thank you, Kitty, and hi, everyone, and welcome. And first of all, thanks to all of those of you who submitted their works and who attended the workshop. It was really a joy to go through them and to see them all, and I was really impressed to see how each of you had their own unique, different style. So just to clarify, I wasn't able to include all the artworks that were submitted. I included most of them, but if you don't find your work here in the session, during the session, please don't consider that as a rejection or anything, or as if your work wasn't good enough or interesting enough. Not at all. I respect every work, each work that you send in, and but I have to just stick with a selection so as not to make this session too long. But having said that, if you don't see your work showing up, but you do have a question, don't hesitate to put it in the chat, and I'm really open to look at any question you submit. So yeah, so I would say let's get started.
All right, here we go.
So today, the way I set this session up is I first took as a starting point
Anna?
Yeah?
I'm sorry, it looks like it went to the end, so let me just go through this and start it over again. I'm so sorry.
Here we go.
There, we'll call this a brief preview. Okay, there we go. All right, here we go.
All right, so the way I set up this session is I first took the main subject that we addressed during the 90-minute workshop, which was underpainting for shadows. And then I looked at what was the main means to achieve a nice underpainting and shadows. That was to create depth and dimension. So that's kind of like the point of departure through which I looked at all of your works. And depth and dimension can really be achieved by different elements, art elements, or principles of design. And some of them are listed here: contrast and value, layering, which is especially true for watercolor, of course, color balance, and expression. So these are sort of the topics that I divided this presentation into, through which we will look at the submitted works. And because I did this, it might seem a little elaborated, but I really believe that it will provide more clarity when we look at our own works through these more formal elements of art. And I think that can really help us to further develop our techniques or our style or our understanding. So, and also it helps to make the whole thing a little more organized, of course. And also because of that, some paintings, some of the same paintings will show up a few times in different slides because they were relevant to different topics. So, also, just another general note, please know that whatever comment I make on the work, it's not about whether they were good or bad, not at all. Every artist has their own style, and I might talk about a certain technique or a skill, and you might think, well, that technique was not really accomplished in my painting. You might have that feeling or opinion. But please don't regard this as a failure or of any kind, because we are always learning, myself included, and we're just on a journey, and wherever we are in our art journey, it's perfect just the way it is. So let's go to the first slide. And having said that, I do believe that a convincing, interesting painting should include a balance between certain elements. And with elements, I mean contrast and value, or color balance, or rhythm, or composition. So that's also why I chose to pick out a few of these elements. And let's start with looking at contrast and value. And so here we have a painting by Samantha and Eve. And at first sight, you could tell, well, these two paintings look very different from each other. But really, in my opinion, what brings them together is how they use contrast in their painting. And although this might not seem very obvious in the beginning, because you could tell that Samantha used quite a lot of contrast, and Eve's contrast is more subtle. So I will go into that a little later, but I first want to say adding contrast to a painting can really help to enhance the suggestion of depth in your painting. So, for instance, if you look at the subject, the face in this case, the portrait, then the features in the foreground, like the nose and the lips, if they are more emphasized, if they are painted with more pigment, darker, than the object in the background, then our eyes interpret that as depth. And so giving depth is very important to make a portrait look more realistic. And with realistic, I don't necessarily mean that it resembles a person in a realistic way, but I mean that the portrait holds some truth, some authenticity in it. So if we look first at Samantha's portrait, she used her own reference photos, so not the photo reference that was used for the workshop, which is fine, of course, because she really did well investigating and explore how to use underpainting. What can you do with it? How should I apply an underpainting? And I really get from this painting I get the sense that it's real. It is realistic, even though the style is very loose. It's conveying something very authentic, I think. Even if it's still not maybe photorealistic. And the reason for me, because she succeeded in that way, is because she used a lot of contrast in her portrait, and she was able to create substantial depth and dimension. And if you look at it, like for instance, her hair, as opposed to the more subtle colors on her cheeks, you could say that she used a lot of different values in her painting. So the value range in her painting is very even, meaning that she used a lot of dark values, some light values, but also some mid values. And if you're not really familiar with the terms values and what they exactly are, don't panic. In a little while, I'm going to explain a little more about the values and how to use them. So I'll come back to it later, but I just first want to look at the two paintings. Because another thing is, even though there's a lot of contrast in Samantha's painting, so the hair is very dark, the lips are very dark, but the skin is more light. She used a lot of midtones, and the midtones, you can see them on her cheeks, on the side of her cheek, the side of her face, in her neck. So the midtones are the tones that are not too bright but also not too dark. And using midtones is really helpful if you want to achieve a more convincing image, a more realistic portrait with enough depth of it. It really helps to create depth. If you would imagine taking out all those more subtle tones that she painted on the skin that I just mentioned in her neck and on her cheeks, if you take those out, the painting would be very black and white, which could be interesting also, but it wouldn't have the dimension anymore. It would get kind of flat. So this is really something to look at in your own work. And let's now switch to Eve's painting on the right. If you compare it, I don't really like to compare, but if you would compare it to Samantha's painting, then it almost seems like the opposite, because there seems to be a very little contrast. The background is a little lighter than the foreground, but still there's not a lot of difference between the different tones. And apart from the lips and the shadows in her hair, there is not a lot that stands out dramatically from the rest, which you could see a little more in Samantha's painting. But that doesn't mean that the painting doesn't work, because I think the painting works really well, Eve's painting. I consider it very accomplished because she also really knew how to balance the different tones, and then especially the mid-tones. So there's not too much dark, and there's not, well, there is some light, but not extremely light tones in her painting. It's somewhere in the mid-range of values. And she did that really nicely, very nice, even balancing out of values. Now, as I promised, I will explain a little more about values. And we can go to the next slide. So value in painting is the intensity of light reflected in color. And I'm sure most of you have seen one of these value range charts where it tells you what the different gray tones or values are in an image. So 1 is completely black, and number 10 is completely white. And then you have all these midtones. So you have 8 midtones to work with to create values in your painting, to create a nice balance between lighter part and darker part, and to create that really nice underpainting with a lighter skin tone to layer over with. So next slide. So the light tones on the right, which they represent white, and the gray tones in the middle represent more moderate tones of light. So there's light reflected in the color. You could compare it, for instance, when you look at water, like a river or a sea where there are some waves. When the sun hits the waves, the top of those waves, they become like white from the shimmering. And that is high value. So that means that the light is totally reflected, 100%. Um, and you can translate that understanding to how you want to use your color. So if we look at this slide, underneath we still see the same grayscale, the value range, and then on top you can see it translated to color. And this is a watercolor chart. These are random colors, by the way. I didn't use the colors that we used in the workshop, but just to show the different basic colors. And with watercolor, it works that if you use a lot of pigment, you will end up at the darker tones, at the low number 1. And the more water you use, the more you dilute your mix with water, the higher the value becomes. And what I want to say is that if you feel that your painting doesn't have enough depth, or you feel like, well, it could use more contrast, or how do I get that underpainting stays still light enough but creates depth, then I would really encourage you to make a chart like this yourself. And you could do that for a new painting you want to start. So you decide beforehand what colors you want to use for that painting, so you can kind of make a palette. And I would suggest not to choose too many different colors, to keep it kind of simple. And then you take a very large sheet of paper and draw a chart on it, a big chart, big squares, and then you take over the value range, which is shown here. You can find those on Google and print them out. They're very easily to find on the internet if you Google grayscale or value range. And you practice with making color charts yourself. And this can be fun, actually, because you can really learn a lot from it. Because you learn how much water you actually need to create those midtones, because it's fairly easy to stay on the very dark side, and it's fairly easy to really make your color extremely light. Just use only water. But to stay somewhere in the middle and use a variety of different midtones, that is what makes it tricky sometimes in our paintings. So a chart like this can be very helpful. And next slide, please, Kitty. We go back to Samantha's painting, and I made a little chart of her use of values that you can see underneath the painting. And this is a chart made in Photoshop, and it shows how she uses the values, the tonal values. And what you can tell from this is on the right, there are the dark tones, on the on the left, the dark tones, on the right, the light tones. And from the chart, you can tell that the distribution of her midtones is fairly even. So she has a lot of different tones. The number 2 and 229 are very well represented in the painting. So she used a lot of different midtones. And she has a peak somewhere near the values 8 and 9. And those represents the skin color, because skin is very light. And a lot of the space of the painting is covered by skin tone. So that's why there's a peak there. But otherwise, it's a very nice and even distribution. And you could also tell there's some nice layering happening on the cheeks, especially, and in the neck and around the eyes. And so this shows how it would look like if you put it in a chart. And it also shows how important it is to keep your midtones balanced. Now let's add the value chart that I made for Eve's painting, which is the next slide. And here you can see that Eve's values kind of stay between somewhere around number 5, 6 until 9. So it's more limited. It's not as distributed as Samantha's, which means, of course, that she used much higher tones, so lighter tones. She used lighter midtones compared to Samantha. And but the painting works beautifully, even though there's a limitation of values. It really works well, excuse me, because the tones that she did use are very evenly organized. So there's not, for instance, a peak at number 2 and a peak at number 9. That would make the painting might look a little out of balance. But the balance happened because she stayed with similar midtones throughout the whole painting. I hope this is not too technical for everybody. I hope this is making something clear. And of course, yeah. I'm sorry, did you say something, Kitty?
Oh, no, I think I just touched my microphone.
Oh.
No, it's all making sense to me, and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Yeah, okay. So I think, yeah.
Great.
I think this is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get on. So yeah, so the tones, even though she didn't use a lot of different tones, they're very well balanced and very evenly throughout the whole composition. And that works too. But to keep it a little simple and to translate all these charts and analysis into plain language is balancing out your midtones will have a huge impact on how realistic and convincing your painting will look. It's fine to use a lot of contrast. Samantha's painting shows that you can use a lot of contrast, but just make sure you also add enough midtones, a variety of midtones in your painting. And how to do that is basically explained in the coming few slides. If we go to the next slide.
And Anna, just so you know, there's a comment in the chat saying that the breakdown is very helpful.
Great. I'm very happy to hear that. Just one more thing about values. If you still feel, well, I really want to practice with this, one very simple tool to do this is to limit your palette. Paint, for instance, with just one color. And choose a subject that you really like, a portrait of someone you love, or a flower, or anything you want. Choose a subject and then paint that subject several times, not just one time. Paint it 2, 3, or maybe 4 times, and then paint it in one color or maybe just 2 colors. Because just using one color, you'll stay very closely to the value range that we just saw before. You could also paint in black and white, but most people find that a little boring, which I also understand. But if you keep it to a monochrome, it's easier to establish those midtones. You can really explore and experiment with those. And monochromes can be beautiful paintings also. So that's one thing I would suggest if you feel like, yeah, I would really like to practice more with this. So let's take a look here at this slide with paintings of Pretest Srinivasan. I'm sorry, I hope I pronounce your name right, Pretest, and Louise Arrowsmith. I would like to look at depth and dimension, but then looking at it from the angle of layering. the technique of layering, because layering is another way to create depth, especially in watercolor. And if I'm very honest, I think, in my opinion, within the medium of watercolor, layering is the most important technique or skill to learn in order to create depth. Because it is a transparent medium. So with transparency, you can create a lot of different values and a lot of different suggestions of shadows and depth. And it's actually also, of course, one of the topics we addressed in the workshop, by layering warmer colors over cooler colors. And that's also what we see here in these two examples. And let's look at Pretest Painting first. You can see a very clear layering of warm colors over the cooler blues that she used. And what she really did well is she made very good use of the blue underpainting that we worked with. But she did it really in her own style, because the blue is still very present in the painting. You can still see it, but it's not too dominant. So she was able to find a really nice balance between using this underlayer but still adding enough warmer layers on top of that. And yeah, I would like to say a little more about the underpainting, because underpainting originally was invented a long time ago. If we go to the next slide, we can see that. In the time of Michelangelo, it was already used. So this is a detail of his famous fresco painting in the Vatican City. And he used blue underpainting for this portrait. And you can see it on the right of the woman's face. You can see the blue shade. And you might think that the blue shade is on top of, like it's a top layer of the painting, but it's actually not. It's an underlayer where he very delicately painted over with warmer colors. And this mixture, that's what created this depth. That's what created the difference between the lighter, shiny part and the more subdued, darker part. So if we go back to Pretest Painting in the next slide, you could, yeah, you could see that the blue is also still very present, and she didn't cover all the blue parts evenly with the warmer flesh colors. And I didn't too. If you remember the painting I created during the workshop, I left some parts of the blue underpainting open and other parts were covered with the warmer colors, the warmer flesh colors. And through this technique of layering, Prita managed to balance out the underpainting with the top layers. And she did that by really using enough layers, adding enough layers, but not too many and not too little. And of course, this also takes practice. And it also shows how the layering brings about more depth. So if you look at the face, especially on the left part where the ear is located and next to the ear on the skin, you can clearly see there's this mixture of a blue undertone and then a warmer color delicately painted over. And you can really tell there's depth in there. You can really see that she was able to accentuate the shape, the form of the face there. And she did that really well, and it's basically through the layering that it happened. So layering gives shapes to a face or to any object that you want to paint, and that's a really good tool also, really good tool to use and to learn if you want to create depth in your painting. And let's take a look at Louise's portrait, where you could see that the blue underpainting is still also very present, but in a more subtle way. So you can see the blue clearly in the background, but if you zoom in a little bit, I know we can't zoom in, but if you just take a close look, you can really see that she used very subtle layers of blue in the face and under the chin and in the hair around the eyes. So she did that very subtle, and it works really well also. So if you're experimenting with layering, you don't always need a lot of pigment or a lot of thick layers to create an effect that you're looking for, to create the shape of a face or the shape. I think what Louisa did really well was the hair. You can really see the natural shape of the hair in a very loose style, and the layering is done very nicely. So, like I said before, you really don't need a lot of any color really to create an effect. I think it's also looking every time and time again, okay, how much layers do I actually need to create that depth? How much layers do I need to really make a part looking more dark, creating more shadow? Of course, we can also apply it in one layer and just use a lot of pigment. That's one way to do it. And but it can be really interesting with watercolor to find out for yourself, how far can I go? How many layers do I actually need to create depth and to create a foreground which pops out and a background that is more subtle and less and has less contrast. And then let's go to the next slide. So we stay with Pretest and Louise's painting, but we change the topic, which is now color balance, because I think these two paintings also really show very nice, they are very nice examples of how to use color. Establishing balance in color in watercolor is actually principally done through layering. So we use different layers, sometimes with different colors, which is called glazing. For instance, if you first paint a blue layer and you add yellow on top of it, then you'll get a green color. So that's glazing. To find color balance in watercolor can be tricky because of that layering. You could also, of course, mix your colors on the palette, which is totally fine. I do that very often myself. I'm really a palette mixer, to be honest. But it can also be interesting to see how you can achieve balance in the whole composition, in the colors that you chose to use, by layering on top of each other. And I think Prita did this really well. She has a very nice balance between the cooler blue and the warmer reds and pinks and yellows. keeping that balance helps also to create luminosity. So Pretest Painting shows like a very vibrant blue, and she used a very vibrant warm color on top of that, so the vibrancy stays in balance. The blue is not a very subdued kind of muffled blue, it's a very bright blue, and the warm colors are bright and vibrant enough to form a good counterpart to the blue. So if you want to go into a painting with a lot of colors, I would suggest to not to keep your palette limited, to really look well at how the colors complement each other. You can see that too in Pretest Painting. The warm colors are nice complementary part to the blue underground. Keep the palette. She also kept her palette relatively limited. And that really helps to find the right balance. And then you can also see that you don't really need to cover the whole surface with color. There are plenty of parts in the painting that hardly have any color, but because the intensity of the color is very well balanced and very relatively strong in the parts where she did use color, then you get this really nice balance. Now, if we look at Louise's work, the balance is very different. So, but very well achieved also. So her colors are more subdued, and the blue is pretty bright, but the skin tones are a little more subdued. And but she kept the eyes and the lips pretty well dark, you could say, like they kind of pop out in intensity, and that works really well also. And so you also don't really need a lot of color all the time. It's really a choice you can make for yourself. How much color do I want to use? And you can do this actually before you start a painting. How much intensity do I want to put in my painting? And Louise's painting is very nice subdued, because I love subdued color in painting. If we go to the next slide, we see two examples of very subdued colors. The left is watercolor by Charles Reed, and on the right, watercolor by Andrew Wyatt. And they both use limited colors, but there's a lot of expression there and a lot of depth in them. So this is just to show you, you don't need a lot of color to make and convincing realistic painting, and to importantly create depth in your painting. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, just a few more things to get back to the color balance. Another thing I just wanted to add is that Louise's work, she also stayed with a very nice variety of midtones, which also really helped to keep enough depth in the painting. I really like that. And of course, another thing we should remember is that if we do really want to work with layers, is to keep those layers transparent. And that's why a chart, making your own chart that I showed a few slides before, can be really helpful, because then we can really find out for ourselves, okay, how much color do I actually want to use? how much water do I actually have to add to get a certain transparency. So yeah, really nice work. And let's go to the next slide. And we stay with the color balance, and we have one work by Megan Saunders and one by Sally Binder. And Megan also made really good use of the blue underpainting. And what I really like about this painting is that she, the eyes of the girl that she painted, I'm not sure if it's a self-portrait, but that just that thought just came to me. I'm not sure, but anyway, it doesn't matter, of course. But I really like the color of the eyes, which are very bright. They really correspond with the color of the background. And it's always a good thing to do, to use some of the color of the background into to add that color into details that are shown in the foreground. She did it really well. And what I also like about this painting is that it kind of seemed like the whole painting seems to be sort of soaked in the blue color. Even the warmer parts, like the hair and the skin, they all seem to have a bit of the blue in them. And that might be challenging sometimes if you want to, like if you add too much blue to your painting, it might become too blue. But she managed to really balance it well. And that extra blue that you see throughout the whole painting kind of adds to the dreamy atmosphere of the girl, which is really nice. And the reason why it worked, why the blue is not too dominant, is because she was able to compensate enough with the warmer colors, even though the warmer colors seem to be a little less represented in the whole painting. She managed to really use just enough warm tones, warm colors, to balance out the blues. And that she chose specific areas where she applied those warmer colors. The lips, of course, and some of the cheeks, the hair. So it's a very nice balance. And I will explain a little more about this balance if we go to the next slide. So I made another chart for Megan's painting, and this is a little different chart than the one I showed before from the chart of Samantha's work. And you can still see the whole value range going from dark tones to light tones, but this time what you see is how the colors are distributed. So what you can see is, for instance, the green colors that she used in her painting are mostly showing up in the lighter values around number 8. And the blue as well. The blue is even more light around number 9. There's hardly any blue in the rest of the value range. So she didn't use very dark blue. She didn't use relatively dark blue. She just used very light tones of blue. And that explains why the blue in her painting works so well. So what she did was, while keeping those blue layers very light, she was able to layer those blue layers in a very evenly way, not making it too dark, not making it too opaque, staying in the high key, in the light tones. That's how she managed to balancing out. And then the reds are showing up more in the center of the value range. Excuse me. So the reds are a little more darker in value than the blue and the green. So they pop out more. And that's how she created the balance between the blues and the warmer details. And let's go to the next slide. So we go back to Megan's and Sally's painting. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about Megan's painting. Well, there's one thing. Yeah, so what Megan's painting is showing, and what can be also helpful for people who want to experiment with layering, is that she layered very gradually, layer over layer, keeping it light, and it's a really good way to work with watercolor. And then if we look at Sally's work, you can see really beautiful kind of, I'm not sure if it's a green or a blue, somewhere in between, but it's a beautiful black background color. It's really popping out, but still working really well because she balanced this cooler color with a very nice yellow skin tone and hair color. And if we look at the layering, we can see that it's very differently done, because the cooler color she chose to work with, the greenish blue, stays in the background, and there's not much blue or green to see in the face. A little bit next to her cheeks, the cheeks of the girl, and next to the neck. There's a bit of cool, darker color there, but otherwise she just only used layers of warmer colors on the skin, for the skin, and in the hair, and I really like this interpretation. I love it, because in her own way she managed to balance out the colors very well as well, with a different approach of layering. And so basically she didn't layer the warmer colors over the cooler colors, at least not in a transparent way, that as we could see with Megan's painting, but she did manage to layer the skin tone colors in a really nice way, and keeping the midtones very balanced as well, so that she created a really good contrast to the pretty expressive background. And I just wanted to show you in the next slide that when I looked at Sally's painting, I was very reminded of the work of the Pre-Raphaelite group. Raphaelite group. I'm not sure if people watching are familiar with that style. It was a group of artists from the late 19th century. They were yeah. Sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. When I touch my microphone, does it make a noise or something?
That's fine. I just want to make sure I'm not missing out on a question or something.
No, I was just waiting for you to pause, because I was going to say it the whole time. I've been thinking that it reminds me of an old Renaissance painting.
Yeah, that too. Renaissance. And so the pre-Raphaelites, they are inspired by Renaissance, exactly. And they make a very specific use of color. And I was really reminded of that. Like if you look at the example of John William Waterhouse, he also kind of divided the painting into a cool green and a warmer brownish. And you can see how that can really work. So yeah, I think that was really nice. And let's go to the next slide. I think I've covered most of the color balance. So Yeah, and if you want to practice with color balance, then just with the value range, the grayscale range, you can make your own color chart. It can be really helpful also. I do that a lot, actually. It's also nice to discover new colors for yourself in that way. So let's go to the next slide. And we stay with the color balance for a little while because I really wanted to talk a little bit about Mona's painting, which has a very unique color balance because she used such a bright pink. And she also used a very nice layering of blue. So she really used the blue for her shadow parts, as you can see in the head really well, the head of the girl. The lower part of the head is a mixture of the blue underground and the yellow color of the head. That works really well. And I can tell that she also tried to use the underpainting for the face. And she did a great job. I would maybe suggest to, because the blue is a pretty cold, well, blue is a pretty cold color, and then the yellow is a little cool color in this case also, that you might want to add a more warmer tone, more warmer colors to the painting, which would be the face, for instance, to so that would make the painting, it makes the whole painting coming to life. Not that this is not a lively painting, it is. It's really lovely. But just something to think about when you work with your palette to balance the cool with the warmer colors. And then Helen's painting, she had another approach of color balance, and a very bright but more dark blue in the background. And what she did was, instead of layering the blues into the face, she sort of made the details popping out, like the lips and the eyes and the hair. And she used the blue mostly for the hair, which was also a part of the workshop. And this really also helps to create the depth. So in the hair, you can tell there's a lot of depth. So the layering works really well there too, and the color balance as well. If you want to give the face a little more shape, you could you might want to consider to add a little more of the midtones in the face. But the contrast between the different colors she used is really very expressive, I would say. And so let's go to the next slide. Yeah, I made another little chart for Helen, because now here you can tell how she used the blue underpainting, and it's really located in the darker tones, in the darker end of the value chart. And the warmer reds and yellows are very obviously on the left part and the light part of the tone range. And this works really well also. But here you can tell that in the midtones, there's not much contrast. So there's not much blue in the midtones, around numbers 5, 6, 7, and there's not much warm tones in there too. So that's something you maybe want to think about. How, or in general, it's something also I also have to think about a lot when I paint. How much color do I use in the midtones? And if we go to the next slide, I made a little comparison, not to compare the two paintings, but just if we look at the color Like I said before, if we look at Megan's painting, the blue and the green are located in the higher values, and in Helen, it's almost the opposite, where the blue and the green is more in the darker values. So both are possible. Both are techniques you can do, but I think a lot has to do also with your intention when you start a painting. How dark do I want to go, and where do I want to use those dark areas? What color do I want to use to make some areas more dark? So these are all things to think about, and I think those charts make it more clear. Perhaps, I hope they do. Let's go to the next slide. So, yeah, so this is the work from Bonita. Really very nice interpretation. She chose her own photo reference, and obviously Bonita works very delicately. It's more photorealism, which is really her own style, and I think it's beautiful. It's very, very accomplished also. But what I really like is that you can see the building up of her painting, and you can see how she started on the right with the blue underpainting, very delicate. So she, I would say, more like the old masters, who also a lot of times used the blue underpainting very delicately and then layered over it very gradually until you don't see the blue hardly anymore in the final photo, the end result. And that's also a way to do it, of course. It depends on your style, depends on personal approach, how you want to, use your own style to approach a technique. And I think she did a really lovely job. Maybe the only thing I would say, if you feel like, I would like to learn or to expand more on this blue underpainting, how I can use it more intensively, and you might want to experiment and make that blue a little more intense from the start. And because what you'll need to do then, once the blue is kind of intense, you have to kind of balance it out with more warmer colors. The cooler a color is, the more warm and luminous colors you need to kind of balance it out again. That's just a suggestion. Of course, you're totally free to experiment with that or not. It's the painting is perfect, so so there's no criticism at all. But it's just, if you want to kind of challenge yourself, I would say, well, maybe I can push myself a little bit and make it a little more blue, the underpainting, and see what happens. See how much warm colors I actually need to get a luminous painting. Okay, next slide. And well, we're getting to the end. I just want to say a few things about expression, because all the topics that we covered until now, contrast and color and layering, they all have in common that they can help to create expression, to enhance your own personal style in an expressive way. And I think Samantha's work and Sally's work are great examples of that. So they used contrast to really give their own expression to their painting. And if we go to the next slide, and Prita and Megan used color as the main ingredient to produce more expression in their work, or more mood, or more of an atmosphere. And so that's another way to give this extra quality to your own work. Experiment with color and see if I can really create more of my own expression, my own style with that. I think it's lovely. And next slide. And then finally, I think these two, they really pop out because they have really their own style also. So Laura's painting is very spontaneous, which is unique because in watercolor working spontaneously is very difficult. And she did that in a great way. She really balanced out the different colors, the different tones in a very good way, sorry. But still kept very close to what I mentioned was her own style. And and that's what generates this expression. And it also shows again that you don't need a lot of contrast, you don't need a lot of color intensity to establish that expression, because the colors are not very vibrant, well, at least not as a whole, and but it still is a very lively painting. So yeah, I think that's a great example of how to work with a loose style. If you want to work more loose, then like Laura did, I would suggest to stay in the light values, stay in the mid-tone values. Don't make it too dark, because as soon as you go dark, it's really hard to layer over, and then you will lose some of the spontaneity. The painting might very muddy. And then lastly, I just want to look at Judy's work, which is also very expressive, because she focused on the details, on the mouth, the lips, and the eyes, and the hair. And the background is very bright also. But and that's what really pops out. So you really look again at a very expressive face, but expressive because of how she focused on the details. And that's also a very interesting way to approach a painting, to really make the smaller features of the subject you're painting more bright, more contrast. And so that's another way of expressing. And you might want to think about, again, which is something I also always have to think about again and again and again, is to how can I add a more of the midtones, especially in the face, to give it maybe a little more shape. Of course, then you have to make sure you're not moving away from the expression and the intensity of the face. But yeah, so these are things to experiment. I'm experimenting with these things all the time. Like I said in the beginning, it's an ongoing journey. But I really like the intensity of this portrait. So I think that's it. I think we're there. If we go to the next slide. Yes.
All right, let me bring you back. Okay. So yeah, everybody, if you have any questions, go ahead and please put them in the chat. And
clear.
And also, if you want to put into action all of these wonderful tips that Anna gave you today, I'm going to put the link to her class into the chat as well. That's up there now. A moment to wait for some questions. And I've been dropping this into the chat as well as we've been going along, but just a reminder that if you submitted work, you can be part of the giveaway that we're doing at the end. You must be present in order to win, though, so just stick around. Let's see, will Anna be doing more classes in the future? I hope so. So if you want to see more from Anna, please do send us an email. Let us know that you would like to do another class with Anna. And the email is hello@etchrstudio.com. Some nice comments here saying, great session and feedback. This was so helpful. Great work. People are saying that they love all the different versions of the work. Another comment saying that the color charts were excellent.
Good.
Great. Yeah, I thought that was really helpful, especially the chart showing how much of the black and white was in there. That was really helpful. All right, well, I am not seeing any more questions, so I guess we can go ahead and do our giveaway. So give me 1 second here so I can share the screen so we can spin the wheel. Okay, there we go. And let me add it to the stream. All right. And here we go. And Bonita, congratulations.
Well done.
Let me write this down. And Bonita, if you can just put your Facebook name into the chat as well, just in case it's different. If it's not different, don't worry about it. But that way we can contact you there as well. So congratulations. And what you'll want to do is email us again at hello@etchrstudio.com so you can claim your prize. So let me go ahead and put that into the chat as well. There we go. All right. So I'm just checking to see if there are any other last minute questions. Doesn't look like it. Just some more lovely comments that you can take a look at later, Anna.
No, I
Sure you'd like
definitely
to see
will.
that.
Yeah, it's great to hear.
All right, yeah, so there's no other questions, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. Anna, any final thoughts before we go?
Enjoy. Enjoy the journey.
Yes.
And thank you for watching, everyone. It's really been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us and spending this time with us today. And again, you can find Anna's class on our website. If you just go there and search Anna, her class will pop up. It's a really wonderful way to learn how to start doing portraits. So yeah, anyway, again, thank you so much for spending this time with us. And until we see you next time, make more art. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.